Thank you all so much for coming and staying till 5 o'clock. I know there's been a lot of information. My name is David Peter Simon. I'm a design researcher who helps businesses understand users and customers, and I help teams generate ideas to improve their experiments and to help improve our experiences. I do this primarily by spending time with people, observing them in their natural environments, hanging out with them, talking with them, and watching them use products and services. Just a side note, by the way, this here's a slide, and you see on the bottom right-hand corner, Learn More, a link. When you see those, these are links to the articles that either I've written or my team has written, and that you can learn more about what I'm talking about. And we'll be sending an email so you can learn more after this as well. I've worked on growth and insights teams in multiple business environments, consulting to some older companies, as Yaroslav mentioned, like banks and fashion houses, and working in-house at more modern tech companies, like Atlassian. I'm particularly passionate about product growth and market expansion. Right now, I do work for Dropbox, and I'm stoked to see you all know it. I work, though, on a new collaborative product called Paper. And this is a poster from our office highlighting our design values. In case you're not familiar with it, Dropbox Paper is a new type of document designed for creative work. It helps you collaborate in real time. You can assign tasks, make to-do lists, among other things. I'm here to share with you a little about how we think about growth and growth design. But to start, I'd like to do 3 things. First, I'd like to thank the organizers and my fellow speakers. May we give Yaroslav and Pavlo a round of applause? I do this because I feel really lucky to have been invited to this conference, to come all the way to Kiev. I'm stoked myself to have been able to see some talented speakers, people like Chris, and I'm particularly excited by the opportunity to share with you my perspective about design research and how it can help grow your business. So thank you again, Yaroslav and Pavlo. Second, I want to warn you, my main message might sound obvious by this time in the day. I haven't built teams like Chris, and I haven't started my own company like Ragnar. I'm just a researcher really passionate about people, and I want to share that passion with you. Okay, this is the third thing, the last thing I want us to do. I'm going to ask you 3 questions. You don't have to yell at me and answer them. You just have to kind of reflect on them quietly. First, when was the last time you interviewed a user or customer? Second, when was the last time that you watched them use your product? And 3, how frequently do you do this? Take a moment, just a sec. Turn to your neighbor. Tell them how frequently you do this. Just 30 seconds. Turn to your neighbor and tell them how frequently do you interview your users or customers. Okay, come on back now. So, please stand up if you interview your users or watch them use your product weekly. So please stand up. Weekly. Great, got a few of you. Wow. So seems like some of you are doing this already, and it seems like all of us could be to use a bit of a nudge to do this maybe a little more frequently. What I'm about to show you or talk about necessarily isn't revolutionary, and it could all be summed up by a few sentences, like educate yourself about how to do research. This isn't customer development. And go then and talk to people, care about them, and use those learnings to improve your onboarding experiences and to tailor your landing page to their needs and their motivations. And the reason I asked you this relates to the central point of my talk today. To win users and positively influence your product, you need to become genuinely interested in your customers and your users, and you need to spend more time with them learning about what interests them, rather than just trying to market yourself or hack your way to growth. That brings me to tell you why I called this talk How to Win Users or Influence Product. Is anyone familiar with this man, by chance? A few of you. Lovely. Who is he? He is Dale Carnegie. Dale Carnegie was an American writer who focused on self-improvement. And I thought his book would be relevant given the topic of this conference, how to attract and retain audiences. The reason I thought his book was one of the quotes where he talks about how to actually make friends. And he puts forth that you don't make friends by trying to make people interested in you, but by becoming genuinely interested in other people. And I think that we can extend this analogy to growth and growth marketing. You can win users when you're actually caring and really interested in the people that you're building for, and when you build something that they're actually interested in. So I want to share with you how this plays out at Dropbox and on the Dropbox paper team. And I want to share with you a little about how we think about growth design. And by the way, this is a window into where we work. We call it a collab space. And this is where we try to interview users bi-weekly in what we call Real World Wednesday. A little more on that later. Right. So for the agenda for today is pretty simple. I'm going to share some examples, then I'll share some resources, then we'll do a Q&A. I'm going to try to keep it really kind of more short because you've already had a lot of information today. So, first though, a question to you again. I like questions. Who here likes Coke more than Pepsi? Can you raise your hand? Okay, a few of you. So, I promise no more questions. I'm not going to make you stand up or raise your hands anymore. The reason I was asking this was to share with you a study. Basically, there was some user research done, a test where they had people drink 1 sip of Coke, 1 sip of Pepsi, blind. And then they said, which one do you prefer? Which one is better? And maybe Coke won. But the problem is that's not how people drink soda in real life. No one has 1 sip here or 1 sip there. We might have a can with a meal, we have a can with friends. I guess the reason I'm sharing this with you is that user research is just as much about the way that we do research than the product that's being researched. And I tell you this because this is not how we do research at Dropbox. We don't ask people what just they prefer. We focus on larger topical questions. For example, we explore the behavioral patterns of new users, asking them to help us understand their situations when they sign up for the product, to pair those motivations gleaned from interview data with drop-off or sign-up flow data. Let me take it a step back, though. When I see growth talked about in relation to Dropbox, I often come across Dropbox's famous referral program, their virality. Basically, Dropbox offered you free space by inviting your friends to the product. It's wildly successful. This was covered by the media, namely in blogs throughout the years. And many talk about our work in terms of hacking the way to growth. To some degrees, this is true, but what we don't lead enough with is the tailored homepage or the work done on that. This is the business homepage for Dropbox, where we specifically tailor our product to that segment of users. Nor do we talk enough about the iterative rebranding approach we take, which culminated last year in a number of new and different color schemes that enables us to visually express ourselves. Nor do we talk about the simple sign-up process to get people converted from free to paid users once they see value in the product, where we expose the sign-up on the front page to create frictionless sign-up. And we definitely don't talk enough about the more ordinary aspects, like the hard work that's being put into onboarding or what we call new user education, NUX. These are all in aim to reduce friction. And this is all rooted in research and design. You know, back in the day, Dropbox ran research, for example, to figure out what was the biggest benefit to using our product. Many and most people mentioned access, the ability to get your files from any device. As a result, a lot of our messaging we used in our landing page and what we communicate focused on access. We doubled down. A lot of this comes by asking through specific studies why. For example, returning back to our growth topics, we might see that we ask, why are potential users doing this or that? Or we might say, well, why do new users fail at this specific step in the flow? Of course, all growth topics don't necessarily need to start with why, but the fundamental thing is that we're trying to learn the sort of demographic and psychographic information to layer this onto our understanding of the data. And by the way, these questions are inspired by a book from Sean Ellis, one of the advisors to Dropbox. And he neatly spells this out in his book, Hacking Growth, on page 117, if you end up buying it. So how does this look in practice, though? Before getting into design research, I was always like, ooh, it's so hard to understand when we keep saying research, but what does it look like? So let me break it down for you. This process is not too dissimilar to what Sean describes in his book. So first we gather raw material. This might be audio clips, photos, videos. Then we make connections. We pair that qual data with analytics. At Dropbox, we do this in the form of what we call cross-functional analysis. And then we find the MVT, what we need to learn that might make this work, the minimum viable test. In paper growth design, we call these MPP, what we would be the minimally proud product that we can give to people. And then we form new ideas around this MPP, and we bring those to life. But again, a lot of this is fueled by asking why. So let's take a look at an example version of a study where we might check this out. And by the way, if you check me out falling, that's because I'm trying to make sure you see this. So, gather raw material. We might go out and gather the raw material. Here you see us talking to, say, like a potential user and understanding how did they try our product, literally, in the moment, specifically, in their own business context. And then what we do is cross-functional analysis. We bring all that data back together, and we organize it, we review it, and we compare it with drop-off data, with the analytics. We have engineers, analysts, everybody in the same room. And then we discuss the potential MPPs, cross-functionally sitting at the same table together. Sometimes we use specific brainstorming methodologies, like one we developed on the growth team at Atlassian called disrupt brainstorming, which you can learn about there. Or sometimes we use new design frameworks, futurist frameworks, like Stuart Candy's Experiment from the Future. Usually what we're trying to do is articulate our MPP in the forms of experiments that can help us learn. And the main crux of this is to form an MVT based on real human needs and then incorporate that into our learning cycle. And from there, then we bring these new ideas to life, usually in the form of new user education or feature discovery. Like in one case where we observed issues with our welcome flow and were able to make recommendations about how we did our empty state in the product. This ended up helping teams actually activate. These all matter, especially when trying to win users, because as our head of growth design once put it, growth is so much more than metric and monetary wins. It's about creating sustainable experiences for engagement. Let me take a break here. Let me tell a joke. Okay, so there's this joke about a drunk he's searching for his wallet. He lost his wallet, and he's drunk, and he's searching for it, maybe over there, under the light. And a policeman sees him, and he says, "Hey, what are you doing?" And he says, "Hey, I'm looking for my wallet." And he says, "Well, why are you looking for it there in the light? I don't see your wallet." And he says, "Well, because the light's better here. I'd actually dropped it over there." This is a scientific principle. It's not very funny when you have science jokes, I know. This is a scientific principle called the Streetlight Effect. It's the tendency for us to study, to look at what's easy to look at. And we need to go beyond just looking at the analytics and ask, why is that happening? So for example, when we see a drop-off on a set of screens, we shouldn't just necessarily assume that that can be endlessly optimized. Instead, we should foster a curiosity about, well, why? What's going on? And then think about ways that we can actually take away rather than optimize or add to the product. Because the ultimate simplicity, actually, and the best designs are the most simple and the ones where we have taken away. So let me tell you a story from Paris that illuminates this. A few years ago, I was working in Paris with a company that wanted to sell car insurance. And they wanted to redo their sign-up flow for the website to get people to purchase it more. They wanted to grow in specific areas, maybe like a new market, like young people. And they were seeing drop-offs on their homepage. A lot of our conversation and some of our design strategy meetings was what we needed to do from like a visual design overhaul, or what sort of marketing campaigns could we do? Maybe, one executive put it, we just need to put more women on the homepage, make the website more beautiful. Sexist problems with that aside, what was apparent was, as a team, we holistically did not understand how people were driving around Paris today. We needed to get back to the human problems, to ask, why are people failing, but also, what do they need from insurance? So what we ended up doing was intercepts in cafes. We would ask people to use the product and watch them, specifically the people who were in our target demographic. We would then look at the challenges they were having on certain screens, and we would pair that with screens that had high exit rates. What actions were they not taking among people who did use the application? A lot of the time, though, we just spent time talking to people about their insurance needs, the challenges they faced. Maybe a little about their demographic background. What other apps do they use? And maybe we even asked people to say, oh, may you come back to the office with your insurance policy later? Maybe point out what's confusing in the physical paper one. This allowed us to create micro surveys tailored to people visiting our website, as well as doing intercepts. So we could take many different types of data, qualitative data, quantitative data, and we could mix it together, because interviews are a great starting point to collecting more information. With all this information, we then realized actually maybe a set of key questions could be removed from the sign-up flow. Or maybe we could actually add a number of filters to make it clear and to have less on the screens. This type of work matters because it didn't cost any extra marketing dollars. It would be a lie if I told you it works like this every time, always goes perfectly. Definitely does not. In practice, it looks a lot more like this. There are many different things going on. But what we need to do is go beyond just staring at numbers. We need to get out of the matrix, if anyone's seen that. I think when we start to ask why about the numbers that we see to match drop-offs with some pretty shockingly obvious or boring statements that we get from people, we start to see the things that we need to fix. And we should all be collectively championing this in our teams. More interviews with people, more observation, and less maybe sitting by ourselves with our headphones on in the office, trying to optimize our way to a better future. I think less moving pixels around and figuring out big marketing campaigns, and more talking to people and just observing them. Because watching people use our products is healthy for us. It reminds us of reality. I'm not sure if this translated perfectly because I know it's about flossing, but basically we should do this because flossing, you get it now. But at the end of the day, again, I guess we saw this earlier through many different talks. In the Google talk, we saw a great example from Larry who said, we should really be watching people. I think a lot of this time, this can be opaque or hard to do. Many times people share with me, I want to do that research, or I would like to go interview people, but I don't know where to get started. Luckily today, there's a lot of great resources online from many luminaries, people like Tomer Sharon, for example. Here in this blog post, he broke down how to find participants. And he talked about how you can, for example, source via LinkedIn if you work in a business-to-business environment. Or maybe go to a coffee shop, depending on the type of consumers that you have. Or maybe you're working on a retail startup. You can go to a mall, especially if one of your competitors, your existing one, is in a brick and mortar area. Or maybe you're working on a product for families. You can go to libraries and you can hang out in the family section. You can learn more from those people, and if you ethically and honestly approach them, you can figure out and learn from them. Or maybe you need a younger population. You can go to universities and connect and network with professors. Or maybe your product is international. Luckily today, there are a number of research platforms. Hello Ping Pong is one, Respondent.io or others. And as you know, I work for Dropbox, so I'm not paid to endorse these. Nor am I saying these are the ones you should use. What I'm just saying is the time is now to do this type of research, to learn about it, to get excited about it, to educate yourself about it, and then to start doing it yourself. Because the best way to learn from this is to do it. And as I mentioned in the beginning, the collab space and Real World Wednesdays, you can learn about many of our processes from Dropbox design. For example, Liana, one of my colleagues from Romania, wrote about how we designed our team. Or you can learn about how we run research. And for those of you who aren't researchers, you can learn how to run research sessions. You can learn how we do what we call Real World Wednesday. This is similar to what I did in Atlassian, where we called it cadence, just talking to people on a normal basis. These are in-depth articles that give step-by-step breakdowns, some that I wish I could have gotten into here today. But you're being thrown a lot of information. So I guess if the one thing you take away from today, if you don't visit any of those links, just remember Dale Carnegie. Remember that the best way to win users and influence your product is to really start caring about them and figure out ways to talk to them, get to know them, and learn about their needs and motivations outside of your product's needs, and then utilize those learnings, pair it with what's in your product to then improve it further. That's all. Thank you.
Questions?
Oh, that's cool.
Hi.
First of all, thank you a lot for your speech. My name is Yevgen, and I have a question. So I know that you used to talk to people in live, but do you use some kind of heat maps on analytics or maybe some kind of web wizards?
Yes.
And what will be more effective? It's like live communication or maybe some internet analytics? Thank you.
So if I understood the question, do I use heat maps and what would be more effective? I think, yes, we use heat maps. We have really great log data. We take all of that information and we try to then understand it. So it's great if you see, say, in your heat map, certain areas where they are heavy clicks or aren't being clicks. Of course, you could then further optimize that. But sometimes understanding why things are happening there and talking through people with it is a very useful way to leverage and utilize the data. So we do both. I would say that they're both very important. You know, sometimes I like to have a glass of wine with dinner, but I also want some water. Both are important to my meal. So.
There was one more.
Hello, David.
Hi.
Thank you for your presentation. Actually, I have maybe the similar questions that I have already asked. Okay, thank you. So, what about products where you can't really reach your customers in person? So, for example, some B2B solution, and your customers located in different parts of the country, maybe overseas and so on. And actually, it's difficult to get access to them.
Yeah. So the question was, what happens when the participants are difficult to get access to when they're in a B2B environment? Well, you're fucked. No, I'm just kidding. There's a lot of different ways that we can try to go around that. So for example, I would challenge the idea that everybody is hard to access. There are many different ways. I don't know your business environment, but whether you're trying to utilize, instead of interviews or in-depth ones, maybe it's an email, one question, or maybe there are certain types of ways that you proxy. Depending on how busy or important these business users are, sometimes you need to incentivize them. Maybe it's about financial incentives, or sometimes it's about giving things in your product in exchange for their time. Or maybe if it's, say, a high-powered executive that you could never interview because they just don't have time for you. Who else could you learn from that knows them intimately? Maybe someone on their team, like their assistant or their secretary. This is someone else who knows intimately all aspects of their day. I think what I would recommend is to never give up trying, because I think we can always find ways to learn from people, and without knowing the full context, I wouldn't be able to know how to help. But if you can find me afterwards, maybe I can talk a little to your specific need. Hi.
Hi, I'm Lucy from Reply.io. I have a question. How do you solve the observer effect when your users don't act like they would have acted if you hadn't observed them?
Yeah, that's a great question. There is no way to solve the observer effect. So to repeat the question, how do you mitigate or how do you handle the challenge of the observer effect when you observe someone that then they change their behaviors? What I would say is that there are two ways to do this. First is we build rapport with the people that we're interviewing or doing usability testing. This rapport enables us to break down barriers and to build a relationship with someone that is trustworthy. Second, what I would say is there is a lot of information when someone is doing something that you know in your heart intuitively to be false. So if you observe someone trying to do something or saying something that isn't actually what they express or feel, I think that that is a very good data point for you to try to understand it. And there are many different ways that you can ask questions about that you can interpret that you can analyze that. And I would say that it doesn't mean that we shouldn't do that information, we shouldn't collect that information. So if you have more specific questions, again, I'd love to kind of address how we ask questions about that. But I would say is you can't mitigate that effect, but there are ways that we can learn from it.
Thank you for your presentation. It's cool. One more effect here to deal with is called survivorship effect or survivorship bias. So the more important information you can get from people who just you don't know why they even don't want to use your product, or how do you deal with this effect? How you find people and approach them to get insights from not those who are positive, but from those who you have no information, no reason why they are not, why they don't like you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So you're talking about. So the question was, how do we, if I reinterpret that question, how do we understand and learn from people who might have churned or stopped using our product?
Right, or never started to, but they know about your product, but they never started to use it.
Yeah.
So
It depends, I think. So we had this conversation yesterday in our workshop. Doing churn research is some of the hardest research, and I think Ragnar spoke earlier in the first presentation about that, about how hard that is. I think it's about simplifying the type of research you do with those types of people, asking one question or keeping it to be a very short interview if you do get that lucky opportunity. I think that depending on the type of people that you have that are not utilizing your product, you have to think about it in terms of an investment. And so sometimes it can be worthwhile to provide financial incentive to understand that, by talking to them, by thinking about it as an reinvesting in your product to spend time learning and talking to those people. With regards to those people who are more potential, I think, again, there are these opportunities to leverage and learn from them by making a human connection, reaching out to them not as a company or a business with a templated email, but reaching out to them as a product manager, designer, or researcher yourself with an honest trying to understand and trying to make that connection with someone and show mutual benefit from how you can help them as well. So offering your time or services in exchange. But again, what I would say is that's a very, very hard thing to do, and it's sometimes why companies hire researchers like me.
I have one. What's your opinion on incentives for those you run interview with?
Yeah.
Like, what are the situations when you have to do? What are the situations when you cannot? Maybe there are situations when you just must.
Yeah, I think the topic of incentives in research is a big, large one. I think that what I would say is that I value people's time, especially if I work in an enterprise space. And so we are trying to make a mutually beneficial conversation and demonstrate that they have a work day with work time. And so oftentimes, if it's an enterprise or B2B space, I'd say that I'd always advocate to do incentives, whether it's financial or, say, taking someone out to lunch. Or if it's not financial, maybe it's making them like homemade food. So I really love to bake. Sometimes I actually bake things for people and bring it in exchange for their time. Or I'm a researcher. I know how to do research. I've done things where I offer to go to a company, maybe I'm doing research, and I say, hey, I'll do a whole workshop with your team about how to do research. I'll do a skill exchange. Or you saw some of these intercepts in the coffee shops or in different lunch places. I'll say, hey, you were just about to buy lunch. What if I buy you lunch? Maybe over lunch you can tell me a little about how what kind of insurance needs you have. For $10, I think this is the best way that I can learn research. Not only do I have someone fun and interesting to talk to at lunch, but I get to learn from them and improve my product. So what I would say is that whether it's a financial incentive, it's a skill sharing incentive, or it's a food incentive, or helping them with their gardening. People at my workshop heard yesterday, I'm really into gardening these days. I'm ready to be an old man. But what I just say is, if you value people's time, you'd recognize that Why would anyone just help you for free? If they're not working for you and they're your user or customer, you should value them just as much as they value you. So I would say try to find the best way to incentivize as you can.
Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.